Hi there, it's Eve here from the Student Voice, and we're really excited to announce that we'll be hosting a free webinar in January that we really hope you can attend. It's designed for safeguarding professionals, and it will introduce and define extra-familial harm, contextual safeguarding, and outline the importance of pupil voice in empowering students. Our webinar hosts will be Jason Tait and Helena Wykes-Dart. And to introduce them, Jason is a director of Pastoral Care and DSL at a leading all-through co-educational boarding school in the UK, in addition to having specific responsibilities for all aspects of pastoral care and safeguarding across his school. His particular interests and expertise lie in the area of positive psychology and contextual safeguarding. He's also co-founder of the Student Voice tool. Helena is a specialist adolescent social worker with expertise of working to reduce the risk of harm to adolescents outside the home, with an area lead of child exploitation. Alongside this, she's the director of the Adolescent Safeguarding Consultancy, which is designed to help passionate safeguarding professionals better protect adolescents through engaging training and consultancy. Her practice focuses on extra-familial harm, using child-centered, trauma-informed practice and contextual safeguarding approaches. So here is a little taster of the topics that will be explored in our January webinar, and we really hope to see you there.
Hello, my name is Jason Tait. I'm the co-founder of the Student Voice Contextual Safeguarding tool. I also work as a designated safeguarding lead and director of pastoral care at the school in England, and I've been working developing contextual safeguarding through Student Voice since 2018. And I'll pass over to Helena, who will introduce herself.
Hey, my name is Helena Wykes-Dart. I am the director of the Adolescent Safeguarding Consultancy. So the Adolescent Safeguarding Consultancy it specialises in working with professionals, community members, volunteers, families around risks to adolescents. So we're looking at kind of 12 plus, and that encompasses all forms of kind of extra-familial harm, contextual safeguarding and otherwise. I am also a practicing adolescent social worker with a locality lead of child exploitation. And that's why I run this business, because I'm really, really passionate about the safety of children and young people.
Hello, my name is Jason Tait. I'm the co-founder of the Student Voice page. And this next 5-minute video section, I'm going to talk with Helena from the Adolescent Safeguarding Consultancy Group. And we're just going to talk about keeping children safe in education, KCSIE, extra-familial harm and contextual safeguarding, what that means for schools, what those terms mean, and how schools can start to develop a safeguarding culture using contextual safeguarding. So, Helena, just to start with, can you help us understand what extra-familial harm means, please?
Yeah, of course, Jason. So when we're using the phrase extra-familial harm, in its simplest term, we're talking about harm outside the home. So basically harm beyond the family unit. So that could be kind of when we're thinking about traditional child protection, typically the way in which we would work as social workers, as safeguarding professionals, as DDSLs, DSLs, we are mostly kind of trained and qualified to manage risk that presents inside the family home. So when you think about the 4 categories of harm, you've got physical harm, sexual harm, emotional harm, and neglect. So they're the 4 main categories of abuse outlined by the Department for Education. But extra-familial harm is best looked at as a sort of separate section, so almost a 5th category of harm, where we're thinking about all those different environments, spaces and places that children, young people and adults come into contact with that are beyond that family remit. So we're thinking about spaces like the online world, because that's huge for our children and young people. We're thinking about kind of out in the community. So it could be in places like the local park they might spend their time, the local fast food restaurant, the sort of transport hub. We've also got spaces and places like their education setting as well. So we're thinking about different forms of harm that can occur to young people in education. And amongst that as well, we've got kind of the peer group. So that's another kind of setting or another environment where young people could be exposed to harm both online and offline from their peers and other young people that they associate with. So that's kind of the best way to think about extra-familial harm as an overall arching kind of title for different things that happen for young people. And if we're thinking about different things that sit underneath that, we've got things like radicalization, we've got exploitation, be that criminal exploitation, sexual exploitation, there's teenage relationship abuse, there's child-on-child abuse, which is lots of different forms of extra-familial harm like bullying, harassment, so that could be sexual harassment, it could be sexual violence, it could be racism, all those different sort of forms of harm, forms of abuse that these young people are exposed to is best known in kind of policy and the KCSIE as extra-familial harm.
Thank you. And so how does a concept such as contextual safeguarding support schools in managing cases of extra-familial harm?
Of course. So contextual safeguarding is an approach that's been designed to combat extra-familial harm. So if we consider extra-familial harm as the fifth category of the actual kind of coined harm, contextual safeguarding is the approach to support professionals, communities, children, young people to reduce that risk and prevent risk of harm occurring. So contextual safeguarding works very much on the basis of a community safeguarding level. It looks at how safeguarding being everyone's responsibility is interpreted. So it very much promotes the approach of all members of society, all members of the community having that ability and that skill to safeguard, and really empowering grassroots up. So looking at how kind of, if you're thinking about it in a school setting, how can we empower students and young people to have a voice and to recognize what's wrong and feel able and safe enough to speak out about that. So we're thinking about active bystanders. We're thinking about reporting concerns of abuse or kind of, even just inappropriate comments that sometimes can get brushed aside. If students are able to acknowledge and recognize that in a contextual way, they might feel able to share that with their other peers. They might feel able to share that with teachers or parents or other trusted adults to be able to kind of respond to that harm. We've also got kind of the ways of working where we're empowering, obviously, your core teaching staff that would be safeguarding trained, but also thinking about how other members of the community and the schooling community can be empowered as well. So we're thinking about people like the dinner people, or we're thinking about the cleaners, we're thinking about maybe people that come and collect the bins. We're thinking about all those different kind of non-statutory services and community members that might be really involved or really invested in the safety of our young people and our students, but might not up to this point have been heavily involved in supporting any safeguarding concern. So it's about how we can empower everyone in the community from a grassroots up to be able to speak out, identify risks of harm, and also reduce it happening to our young people.
That's great. So just to summarize, KCSI asks schools now to be aware of extra-familial harms that happen in the community, and contextual safeguarding provides schools with the framework to involve the community in keeping young children safe.
Yes, absolutely. So I think if we think back to last week's video then, where I did speak about extra-familial harm and contextual safeguarding, and how contextual safeguarding heavily promotes all the different voices of the community. So that incorporates kind of community members, so it might be family members, it could be children and young people, it could be kind of influential members of community like, leaders, it could be local shopkeepers, it could be bus drivers, it could literally be any members of the community and society. Because when we're thinking about those different contexts and spaces and places that children, young people and vulnerable adults are exposed to harm, we were speaking about how it doesn't just happen in the family unit. We're thinking about outside, so we're thinking about their peer groups, we're thinking about in the physical community, we're thinking about that online world, we're thinking about education settings, all those different spaces and places. It's super important, and it's a massive drive of the contextual safeguarding approach to empower those community members. And a large part of that is very much acknowledging that, yes, children and young people, so our students, they are under the age of 18, so in the eyes of the law they are a child, but actually their voice is so important. We need to empower their voice, we need to capture their voice, we need to be able to provide them with some responsibility, so they feel a part of the community, they feel valid, they feel heard, they need to share their views and concerns, be that about themselves, someone else, or a different space that they might spend their time. And us as professionals, with our duty and our responsibility to safeguard everyone, we have to understand their experiences. We can't just sort of project our lived experiences or our professional graces onto these young people and assume that certain spaces or places are more unsafe than others without gaining the views of these young people. Because spaces that we think might be unsafe as a professional, these young people might themselves feel it's a really safe space because of certain rules that are at play in those spaces. So we'll talk much more about this in the webinar, but it's very much about our duty to empower their voice, to be able to give them their voice to be heard, to allow us as professionals and empowering the community members to respond to that harm appropriately and safely.
So to summarize that, there's two parts to this, really. So by listening to the voice of the student, we're empowering those students and make them feel valued members of our community and help them develop their levels of responsibility.
Yeah.
To safeguard communities. And then as professionals who are working in safeguarding, through authentically listening to student voices, we can really understand the context in which harm is happening.
Yeah.
We have that level of understanding, we can then put interventions in place that are more targeted and hopefully serve to prevent future harm. Does that seem fair and reasonable?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, great. So our webinar, we've covered really the theory now. We've covered out community safeguarding, contextual safeguarding, extra-familial harm, the role of student voice. So if you come along to the webinar, which will be a live webinar, Helen and I will talk about how we can apply this in a really practical way. So the purpose of the webinar is really to facilitate and show in action how contextual safeguarding works in combating and managing issues of extra-familial harm through listening to and understanding student voice. So if you do have the time, we look forward to seeing you at the webinar, which will hopefully be a really helpful piece of work in understanding contextual safeguarding and extra-familial harm. Thank you.
Thank you.